Police dog refused to leave the bus. What the driver did next will leave you speechless. A deadly situation unfolds on a bus when a police dog in the back refuses to disembark, and what the driver does when he notices will leave you speechless. The bus driver noticed the traffic light turn red a few hundred yards ahead. Instinctively, he lifted his foot off the accelerator and began slowing down, only to feel the sharp tip of a knife press against the soft skin behind his left ear. "Oh no, you don't," the thug behind him hissed. "Don't slow down and don't stop." The driver quickly glanced at his rearview mirror, seeing two patrol vehicles with flashing blue lights trailing at a safe distance. He also noticed the German Shepherd lying in the grass behind them. The dog appeared calm, but the driver recognized the signs of tension. His ears were pricked forward, muscles coiled, and most telling of all, his eyes were locked on the man with the knife. "At least I've got one LA on the bus," the driver thought. Little did he know there was one more waiting outside. An hour earlier, Thomas Moore had been in his driveway, tinkering with his vintage car. For years, while working as a K-9 officer, owning a piece of history on four wheels had been his dream. His daughter Elizabeth waved as she strolled down the garden path, with Poncho, his giant German Shepherd, trotting closely behind her. "Be careful, honey," he said, waving back. She laughed. "I've got Poncho with me, Daddy. I'm safer than Fort Knox." And with that, she turned left and disappeared down the road. Thomas always felt a little uneasy when Elizabeth headed off to town on her own. But she was right. With Poncho around, she'd be safe as houses. Thomas's mind started a meandering journey down memory lane. He and Poncho had been partners in the truest sense for 7 years. He couldn't even remember all the arrests they'd made. Poncho was fearless and the most intelligent dog Thomas had ever had by his side. He had the uncanny ability to sense a perpetrator in a crowd. This had often been the key to getting extremely dangerous people off the streets. They had only failed once, but he didn't want to think about that anymore. He was retired, and someone else would eventually apprehend the young thugs that terrorized the city. Elizabeth and Poncho didn't have to wait long for the bus to arrive. The driver knew both of them and ruffled the dog's ears when they boarded. Elizabeth made her way to a seat close to the back of the bus with Poncho in tow. She sat down, plugged her earphones in, leaned her head back, and closed her eyes. Beside her, Poncho panted while checking out the other passengers. Once he was sure there was no threat to Elizabeth, he lay his head on his front paws, but his eyes never closed. 10 minutes later, Poncho's whole demeanor changed. A young man in his late 20s boarded the bus. The dog's senses tingled. Something about this man made him uneasy. The big German Shepherd shifted a little so he could keep the man in his line of sight. 2 stops later, another young man boarded, and Poncho became even more uneasy. The man sat down next to the first man, and the dog was now on high alert. In all his years as a police dog, these instincts had been honed to a fine edge. He trusted himself and knew that he knew when something was wrong. He placed his head on Maddie's lap and gave a soft whine. At first, she simply thought that he wanted to be cuddled and started scratching between his ears. But when Poncho's gentle whimpers continued, Elizabeth realized he was trying to get her attention. She'd known Poncho since he was a puppy, and she knew to take him seriously when he tried to tell her something. Elizabeth looked at Poncho carefully. She followed his gaze to the 2 young men in the seat near the front of the bus. Then the dog edged closer to her, positioning himself between her and the possible threat. Suddenly scared, Elizabeth pulled the headphones from her phone and messaged her dad. "I think there's trouble on the bus. Dad," she wrote. "Poncho is uneasy with 2 guys that got on a couple of stops ago." Thomas went ice cold when he read the message. He ignored the grease on his fingers and immediately responded, "What's he doing?" Elizabeth looked down at Poncho and responded, "He's on high alert, Dad," not taking his eyes off them. A fist clenched his heart when Thomas read the reply. When Poncho did this, it meant the situation was serious, and in all their years together, Poncho had never made a mistake. "Can you take a pic without them seeing it?" Elizabeth slid down in her seat and looked carefully at the 2 guys. They were in some kind of conversation, nervous perhaps, even a little jumpy, but they were looking at each other, which meant she would be able to photograph their profiles at least. She clicked a couple of pics and sent them to her father. If he'd been panicked before, Thomas was suddenly frantic. The 2 men in the picture in front of him, the 2 men on the bus with his daughter, were members of the gang who had eluded him for years. I want you to get off at the next stop. Pretend that it is your stop. Don't look at them. Just get off the bus. Let me know the moment you're off." Elizabeth did as she was told. As casually as she could, she left her seat and headed to the front of the bus. "Not your normal stop," the bus driver said. "Nope," she said as happily as she could. Other plans today. When she stepped onto the pavement and heard the doors of the bus close with a whoosh, she texted her father, "I'm off." She was relieved, but then she looked around for Pancho and felt her heart make a free fall. He wasn't with her. "Pancho's not with me, Dad. I think he stayed on the bus." Thomas felt a lump in his throat. His daughter was safe. Don't worry about Pancho. He can take care of himself. Next, Thomas phoned his old office and briefed them about the situation. Radio Control dispatched black and whites even before he had finished speaking. When he disconnected the call, Thomas jumped in his own Jeep and headed to the bus route. He'd been retired for almost a year, but these punks were unfinished business, and today was the day that unfinished became finished. On the bus, the driver became aware that Pancho was sliding forward on his stomach. The doll was doing it slowly, inch by inch, so nobody would notice. Man and dog made eye contact in the rearview mirror. The driver could swear Pancho was communicating with him, telling him to keep doing what he was doing. And somewhere inside, he knew the dog would tell him when the time was right. The cop cars following the bus had now switched their sirens on. This made the perpetrators even more jumpy. In the rearview mirror, Pancho had inched forward again. He was now sitting right behind the two criminals. The driver looked ahead again. The bus was inching closer to the traffic light, and if he sped up like the thugs wanted, he would put them all in terrible danger. If he didn't act, the men would take the passengers hostage. He needed a diversion, and he needed it fast. Thankfully, the dog sitting in the aisle was ready to provide the perfect one. When their eyes met again, Pancho's ears flipped forward, and he crouched. The driver understood the signal, and what he did next left all the passengers speechless. Without warning, the driver slammed on the brakes. The thug with the knife nearly went through the windshield, stumbling backward to regain his balance. That's when Pancho sprang into action. The two collided in midair, Pancho's massive body crashing into the man with enough force to knock the wind out of him. Without missing a beat, Pancho swiftly turned on the second criminal. The man tried to run down the aisle toward the back of the bus, but Pancho caught him halfway and effortlessly brought him down. The bus screeched to a halt, and 3 officers in full-body armor boarded, firearms drawn. As Pancho stepped off the bus, Thomas was waiting beside Elizabeth. The dog ran toward his family, thrilled to have been of service one last time. Days later, both Pancho and the driver received medals for their bravery. It was the happily ever after they both deserved. What an incredible story! If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. See you in the next video.